Very good. So now let's go to our panel discussion. Next is a panel discussion by SAAYA, our South Asian Youth Activists and Allies. It's a subsidiary of the new ISW Young Professionals Group. As I said, they're a newly formed group, but they dove right into the socially relevant issues of the current times. This session will highlight the overall Black Lives Matter movement, and why we as South Asians should care about it. We have so much to learn from our youth. So let me pass it off to our very own, very talented Shub, who is a SAAYA committee member, and Kavya.
Hi, everybody. My name is Kavya Raghunathan, and I'm one of the committee members of SAAYA. Thank you for joining and welcome to our discussion, Racial Solidarity as South Asians. A huge hats off to ISW for putting in so much work to ensure our community can still enjoy India Day from home, which is honestly the highlight of the summer here. So we are SAAYA, or South Asian Youth Activists and Allies. In light of the anti-racist revolution that's been re-sparked by the murder of George Floyd, we found this emergence of passionate and outspoken young professionals in our community. These young professionals on their own have been organizing vigils, hosting podcasts, calling for anti-racist action in their school systems, and taking to the internet to post on social media or write op-eds. Raj Uncle and Shaman Auntie saw the potential in this group of young people and brought us together to discuss what's next. How do we use this energy to create lasting change? Well, we realized the immensely important role that South Asians play in both perpetuating and combating racist rhetoric. We wanted to create a channel to equip youth and young professionals with the tools to question the norm, question and intervene in racist situations, understand institutional racism, and defeat complicity to our best capacity. So what better way to start these discussions than to create a network and a community of like-minded young individuals? With the support of the Indian Society of Worcester, we created SAAYA, which is committed to social justice and racial equity initiatives in the South Asian community. Our mission statement reads, through dialogues, education, disseminating of resources, and engaging with peers and the wider South Asian community, we hope to advance our mission of organizing social justice activism, standing in solidarity with our Black, Indigenous, and people of color peers, and self-reflecting on our own community's role in perpetuating injustice within the South Asian community. As we expand in the future, we hope to host open forums, movie viewings with the discussion board, and intergenerational Zoom Q&As regarding a diverse range of topics such as Black Lives Matter, LGBTQ+ rights, intersectional racism, intersectional feminism, colorism, sexual assault awareness, mental health awareness, and disability rights. So if you or anyone you know is in the 14 to 35 age range and is interested in contributing to this kind of work, please feel free to reach out. Our email and a link to fill out an interest survey will be displayed towards the end of our presentation. So without further ado, I have the absolute pleasure to introduce our guest speaker, Kavya Balaji. Kavya recently graduated from Northeastern University in Boston, where she studied international affairs and social entrepreneurship. Currently, Kavya is working towards her master's in security and resilience studies. She worked at the Ashoka Foundation in Singapore, where she worked to empower systems-changing entrepreneurs and promote the mission that everyone can be a changemaker in their own communities. Kavya started a Black Lives Matter initiative in the beginning of June following the death of George Floyd, and her letter went viral, reaching hundreds of thousands of people and was even featured in CNN. So let's hear it from her. All right, Kavya, take it away.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Kavya. I'm happy to be here virtually. Since the beginning of June, the Black Lives Matter movement has come to the forefront of our news, our social media, and our conversations. The disturbing video of George Floyd being murdered shook the country to its core and resulted in a complete reevaluation of the role of race, and specifically, what it means to be a Black person in this country. Floyd's death might have seemed like the catalyst of it all. However, his death was just the tip of the iceberg for the Black community. He was not the first victim of police brutality, and he was not even the most recent victim of police brutality. The Black Lives Matter movement began in 2013 following the death of 17-year-old Trayvon Martin. Trayvon Martin committed the mere act of walking home from a convenience store when his killer, George Zimmerman, followed him and then shot and killed him. The acquittal of George Zimmerman sparked this movement. The mistreatment and attacks against Black folk is not a new occurrence in America. This is something that has always happened. There are many names that we do know who have experienced these racist attacks. Stephen Clark, Philando Castile, Sandra Bland, Eric Gardner, Tamir Rice, Michael Brown. And there are even more names in which we do not know. The BLM movement has been thought to be a tool to reimagine the world where Black people are free to exist and free to live. The BLM movement demonstrates that Black people deserve to be fought for, and we can and should be allies in this fight. The issue with modern racial injustice is not a problem of this country having a few racist bad apples. The issue is that the entire tree is infected. In other words, the entire system is based on racist principles and surrounds the idea that Blackness and dark skin is bad and dangerous. Police officers often justify their use of deadly force in each high-profile killing by suggesting that they felt in danger at the time. However, considering that most of these cases involved unarmed individuals, this signifies that the melanin in one's skin is threatening or a weapon in their eyes. This notion that Black equals threatening has been ingrained into many of us, and we uphold this through actions big and small. Even the small action of clutching your purse when you see a Black man in a hoodie walk by is a way in which we equate Black skin with danger and see it as a negative. While discourse about the Black Lives Matter movement has become prevalent in mainstream society, the conversation has been largely centered around Black or white role in all of this. Many Asian Americans sat on the sidelines thinking that this issue did not pertain to us. However, as seen with George Floyd, an Asian American contributed to his murder. This is clearly not a Black or white issue anymore. However, there is still a disconnect between what is happening with the movement and American social justice and the Desi community. I soon recognized that there was a gap in racial solidarity with South Asian Americans. As I dived into being an advocate for this movement, most of the resources I had found for education on this topic were geared toward white folk and were overly critical of people who did not understand the movement. I realized that many South Asian immigrant families like my own did not learn US or Black history in the US. So it made sense that they didn't automatically understand all of the complexities of this matter. I saw that many of my friends were very passionate about this matter, but they were struggling to start a discussion with their own families. And they didn't know how to communicate the BLM movement clearly in a way that resonated with their family members and their community. I started this initiative to bring awareness and to educate the South Asian Americans about Black Lives Matter and why they should care. This letter is geared to aunties and uncles and is supposed to help start that conversation in an empathetic and kind manner instead of critical. It provides many examples that connect to our South Asian culture, and I wanted to make sure that it came from one of our own who deeply cares about and understands our culture. This letter acts as a starting point with many resources, videos, and links, and should open the door for further conversation. I'd now like to spend some time discussing the history of Black Americans and why we should care. In order to understand racial injustice today with regards to Black Americans, it is critical that we have a solid understanding of Black history in America. Black Americans have been oppressed in our country for centuries. Even after slavery was abolished in 1865, racist policies known as the Jim Crow laws were enacted throughout the South, which aimed to prevent political and economic gain by Black Americans. Under these segregation laws, Black Americans were supposed to receive separate but equal treatment under the law, but this was not the case. Through the civil rights movement, some of these effects of these laws have been reduced. However, systemic racism, which is how racism affects society through intentional laws and social systems, hasn't stopped, and slavery is not just a thing of the past. It has just taken a new form, namely police brutality and mass incarceration. Modern day policing evolved from slave patrols, where enslavers recaptured and punished the enslaved who had escaped. Unfortunately, not much has changed since then. Black men still have a 1 out of 1,000 risk of being killed during an encounter with the police. In most of these encounters, police are shown to use excessive force, yet face little to no consequences. In 99% of killings by the police, there's a result of zero accountability. If a country was made up of just Black Americans, it would be the fourth highest country for people killed by the forces after Honduras, South Africa, and Burkina Faso. And we don't even see all of the instances of Black men being brutalized but not killed, otherwise known as daily occurrences for Black people. Police violence against Black people is not new. It has just started being recorded. In several states, barbers require more training hours to start working than police officers. Going beyond that, Black Americans are also oppressed by being 6 times more likely to be incarcerated than white Americans for the same crime too. The war on drugs in 1971 was a tactic created to target Black communities. It was an excuse that the government could use to throw Black people in jail. In fact, John Elrickman, the top advisor to the Nixon administration, has been quoted to say the following: "We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or Black. But by getting the public to associate hippies with marijuana and Blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both very heavily, we could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drug? Of course we did." Many politicians like him have purposely come up with ways to keep Black Americans oppressed. White supremacists benefit from mass incarceration, as 1 in 4 Black men go to jail and cannot vote. Those who aren't imprisoned and stripped of their other basic rights are stripped of their basic rights such as housing and the ability to vote. This is blatant racism and it should not be tolerated. But now you might be asking, okay, that's interesting and all, but why should I care? South Asians benefit from the civil rights movement. The civil rights movement began and still fights against these horrible instances of racial inequality. We as South Asians in the US benefit from this movement every single day. In 1927, the Asian Exclusion Act was passed that barred South Asians like us from coming to the United States. The purpose of this law was to preserve the idea of American homogeneity, or in other words, they wanted to keep America white and untainted by what they believed were lesser cultures, and we are not lesser cultures. The work of the civil rights movement brought awareness to racist policies and pushed Congress to pass the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965. This allowed Asian immigration into the US. If it wasn't for the work of Black Americans, we would not be living in the US or living the lives that we have been today. Furthermore, without the efforts of Black America, we would face severe employee discrimination and be openly segregated on the basis of our skin color today. If we do not support other oppressed communities, who will help us? While police brutality and hate from white supremacy is mainly directed at Black Americans, it could just as easily happen to us. In 2015, the police received a call about a skinny Black man walking in Madison, Alabama. The police thought this man looked suspicious and swept this frail old man's legs from out under him and then slammed him to the ground head first, and he ended up partially paralyzed as a result. Who was this man? This man was an Indian grandfather named Suresh Bhai Patel. He was visiting his son from India and decided to take what would have been an uneventful, harmless stroll around his neighborhood. And surprise, surprise, no charges were filed against this officer, and those charges that were filed were dropped. Take a moment to think about the Indian elders in your life. What if this happened to them? It is in our best interest to help change these policies and mindsets around policing. There's actually a famous quote from during the Second World War. "First, they came for the socialist, and I did not speak out. Why? I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionist, and I didn't speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. And then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me." If we do not speak out for other communities, one day there will be no one left to speak for us. Do Black people deserve this? The model minority myth. If you're thinking, we South Asians have worked hard to get where we are, why can't other groups do the same? We absolutely have worked very hard to get where we are, and we do deserve our accomplishments. Indian Americans have the highest rates of education and median family incomes compared to other ethnic groups in America. Some use the fact that there is a dark-skinned race that is successful in America as an argument to show that America is not biased to skin color. This model minority narrative is designed to use the successes of our groups as weapons to hurt other racial groups, and sometimes even our own group. White supremacists know that if people of color come together, they could fight the system, so they support this idea in order to keep us apart. We must acknowledge that we have certain privileges that allow us to succeed while Black people struggle. Many of us had the opportunity to receive quality education and were selectively recruited to come to the United States. Our education levels and work ethic may not be reflective of South Asia as a whole. While many South Asians struggled under the colonial era, Black Americans can be similarly thought to be colonized in the United States, and they've experienced 2 centuries of enslavement followed by further persecution. As we celebrate Indian Independence Day this week, and we reflect on our previous colonial struggle and the freedom we've enjoyed for the last 73 years, we should not turn a blind eye to our currently oppressed Black brothers and sisters. We may face day-to-day personal racism, but Black Americans face systemic racism on a whole different level, as the entire system is designed to oppress them and keep them struggling. We must not use the model minority myth as a way to differentiate ourselves from Black Americans. For those who say, I'm not racist and I think all lives matter, we are glad that you do not actively contribute to racism. But being non-racist does not change the current institutionalized framework. Furthermore, we all have inherent biases that we should recognize, and we benefit from a system that oppresses Black people. In order to make a change, we must rally to be anti-racist and vocal. I understand why many of us have chosen to stay silent amidst racial injustice in the past. Silence is comfortable. By staying silent, we do not cause problems in our community. We can sit around and wait for someone who is more qualified and powerful to step up and make a change. However, the ability to stay silent and turn a blind eye while another group undergoes suffering every single day is a huge privilege that we must acknowledge and utilize for good. This type of systemic change requires all of us to get on board and push the needle forward. If we do not actively choose to be anti-racist, we will continue to hear the same tragic stories for decades to come. In fact, by staying silent, not talking about this with your family, not talking about this with your community, we are helping the oppressor. If you saw the video of George Floyd and felt pity for him, that is not enough. While all lives should matter, currently some lives are treated as if they do not matter. That's why we say Black Lives Matter. They've gotten the shortest end of American society's stick. Saying and supporting Black Lives Matter does not take away from the value of our or other lives. If your house was on fire and firefighters came to put out the fire and your neighbor said, hey, what about my house? Does it not matter? Or if you went to a breast cancer fundraiser, but other people were asking, hey, why are you focusing on breast cancer? Don't other cancers matter too? That would just sound silly because that goes without saying. But the focus should be on the topic that is of concern at the moment. And then there's people who say blue lives matter. And this is problematic because police officers make an active decision to work in the field, while Black people cannot choose to take off their Blackness at the end of the day. Rioting. While rioting is not occurring as much anymore, when you see rioting occurring on the news, please remember that they're not rioting just because of what happened to George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, or Breonna Taylor. There is an inherent unrest leading to the violence because this is the tip of the iceberg after hundreds of years of persecution and abiding a system that only exists to hurt them. They no longer want to be silent to a system that oppresses them. They want to make oppression a problem for the oppressors. Prior to this, Black Americans participated in many examples of peaceful protests, but they have never made a difference. Even so, most of the protests organized right now are organized to be peaceful. In these protests, people have died. They've lost their eyes to rubber bullets. They've been severely tear gassed, and many of them even went to jail. This should show how far they have been pushed by systemic racism if they're willing to risk everything. Riots are not the issue. Riots are the byproduct of an even worse problem. Furthermore, America is a country built on rioting and looting. It is also how us South Asians obtained our freedom from British colonizers. We often hear the argument that protesters should not loot, and there's a right way and a wrong way of making change in our society. Many often cite India's independence as an example in which nonviolence methods result in success. This is partially true. While we did have incredible nonviolent revolutionaries like Gandhi in our fight for Indian independence, we must not forget that we also had lesser known revolutionaries like Bhagat Singh, Azad, Ambedkar, Ashfaq Khan, Rani Lakshmi Bai, Lakshmi Sehgal. They all played a major role in our fight. India did not overcome and overthrow 200 years of harsh colonization using purely nonviolent, peaceful protests. And to think so would be to erase much of Indian history. The narrative is woven because oppressors feel that if the oppressed need to fight for their independence, then perhaps more communities would actually rise up and make that difference. While it would be amazing if we were able to use solely non-violent methods in order to incite systemic change, this can't always be the case. As Trevor Noah explained, as members of a society, we essentially agree to a social contract and decide on common practices in order to maintain order. What vested interest do Black Americans have in maintaining this social contract if they see that time and time again, society does not honor that contract, and they force them to sign it anyways? Or when Black people lose their lives with no consequences at the hands of those who are supposed to protect us and enforce the law, the social contract loses meaning if those in power cannot uphold their side of it. And since the beginning of these protests after the death of George Floyd, we have seen that a lot of these methods are actually making a difference, and there have been many achievements, some of which include all of Floyd's murderers have been charged. Minneapolis lawmakers vowed to disband the city's police department. Mayor Bill de Blasio of New York also pledged to move funding from the city's police department into youth and social services. Many police departments have committed to enacting measures of police reform. And the Black Lives Matter movement has in fact been the largest movement in all of US history. We've made tremendous progress, but we are still at the beginning of this fight. The BLM movement is not a short-term trend, it's a marathon, and we should strive to include small actions that support racial inclusion into our daily lives. It is not the time to participate in performative activism or virtue signaling. It is time to work to become lifelong allies in this fight. Earlier this year, police officers used a battering ram to enter the house of Breonna Taylor. She was a 26-year-old emergency room technician. They used a no-knock warrant in order to enter the room without warning or disclosing their identities as law enforcement. The police were investigating another suspect at that time for narcotics, and there was no drugs found at her place. Breonna Taylor was shot 8 times, and she did not receive any medical attention for 20 minutes afterwards. She was completely innocent, and she did not deserve to die. Even if she was not innocent, she did not deserve to die. The officers who killed her, Jonathan Mattingly, Brett Hankinson, and Miles Cosgrove, have still not been arrested. However, her boyfriend, who was acting in self-defense, and hundreds of people who have protested her death have been arrested. This is just one example of the lack of racial justice in America. And in recent news, Oprah Winfrey actually commissioned 26 billboards to demand the arrest of Breonna Taylor's killing. So this is still happening. This movement is still going. Lastly, it's important for us to pay attention to and to reevaluate our inner biases. Anti-Black sentiments do run deeply in our community in the form of colorism. These sentiments come from British colonialism as they champion social Darwinism and associated Eurocentric features such as light skin with intelligence and civilization. The British pitted dark-skinned South Asian against light-skinned South Asians, and they often gave the latter, light-skinned South Asians, better societal positions and more acceptance. South Asians actually ended up internalizing a lot of these messages perpetuated by the British, and this message is very pervasive still today. Through advertisements for skin lightening creams, songs that compliment light skin, and praise of light skin celebrities, Indian media often sends a flawed message that light skin is better. By supporting this idea, we also perpetuate anti-Blackness. This sentiment is deeply harmful to our culture and to Black culture. There are countless stories of young girls in India who've had their self-esteem destroyed after being told that they are not good enough, that they will not get married, and that they will not be successful just because of their dark skin. It is time to stop accepting that light is better. Our worth should not be determined by the melanin in our skin, and we must spread that dark skin is beautiful too. Please actively deny this idea when you encounter it. Be aware that accepting compliments for our light skin, buying skin lightening products, joking about dark skin, and glorifying light skin celebrities contributes to this idea. Our community has already benefited from the BLM movement as this momentum created in the BLM movement resulted in Fair and Lovely rebranding and Shadi.com removing their skin color filter. This colorist ideology adds to the overall racism that has been displayed in America today. We should not be worshiping light skin. We should not believe that light-skinned people are more worthy of all aspects of life. We should stop subconsciously believing all of these toxic ideologies. That is when we will truly break free from our inner biases and begin treating everyone equally and fairly. The change begins within each of us and all of us. The main message I would like to convey today is that we must pay attention. We must listen. We must learn about the treatment of Black people in America, and we must take action. The story of racial injustices of Black people is a story of all of us. It's a story of racial progress in America. We must decide for ourselves what role we will play. As Indian Americans, we're one of the few minorities in strong places of power. Our voice counts, and we have a responsibility to take a collective stand in this fight. Thank you so much for listening. Please feel free to ask me some questions. I'll also be sticking around for the panel, and I can ask some questions there as well. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you so much, Kavya, for that really rousing introduction to what we'll be discussing in this coming half hour. I wanted to thank everyone again for joining us this afternoon. Thank you so much to Raj Uncle and Shamananti again, as Kavya said earlier, for mentoring SAAYA. My name is Shub Agarwal. I'm one of the committee members as well. And I wanted to take a brief moment to first acknowledge and appreciate ISW for giving us this space, as well as Kavya. Thank you so much for that really wonderful discussion. So we've assembled a few of our SAAYA members to consider some of the questions posed by Kavya just now, and also talk about our own involvement and engagement with the Black Lives Matter movement. We're obviously all at very different stages in our lives, and so we think it might be helpful to hear from a variety of us about what we're up to and how we consider some of these questions that maybe some of us are now considering after hearing Kavya speak. So we'll also be monitoring the comments section of the Facebook Live feed. So please do feel free, as Kavya mentioned, send in some questions, your thoughts, and we will of course get to them if we can over the next 30 minutes. So please do throw those into the chat. I'm going to invite all of us to first introduce ourselves, as well as talk a little bit about what got us started in this movement, what motivated us to get involved. I'll go ahead and get started. My name is again Shub Agarwal. I'm a school counselor in Worcester. And really what motivated me to get started in the Black Lives Matter movement and start to engage myself a little bit more was realizing how much I hadn't learned about systemic racism growing up, how it took me until graduate school when I was 24 to realize that systemic racism really is still a very pervasive part of society, and it leads to mass inequities not seen by myself given my privilege. And so unfortunately it took me quite too long to learn, but I really am now making up for lost time, and I'm hopefully going to be involved in this movement for a very, very, very long time. I'm going to ask Kavya Raghunathan to also share.
Thanks, Shub. Hi again, everybody. I'm Kavya, and I'm currently working as a research associate at Harvard and the Broad Institute studying neuropsychiatric diseases in a stem cell context. For me, growing up in central Massachusetts as a person of color, I experienced my own share of microaggressions, but I understood and still understand that what I experienced is nowhere near what Black people have experienced. And I know that I have much more privilege as a South Asian, and I want to use that privilege to inform, advocate, and fight for a better future for the Black community.
Thank you, Kavya. Next, we'll hear from Kirtana.
Thank you, Shiv. Hi, everybody. My name is Kirtana, and I recently just graduated from college in May as a double concentration in information systems and political science. And I'm going to be going in as a business systems analyst at a marketing firm starting in September. And during my studies, I've done a lot of different political science researches, mostly based on ethnic genocides within first world countries and third world countries. And during my research, it made me realize that there's a lot of prevalent issues in our lives today. So yes, I did the research about other countries, but I also started to realize there's so much going on in our own country, and we need to put our best foot forward and try to solve those issues. And as I started to learn more about that, as I'm going into corporate America, I'm also learning about different microaggressions that are within. So during quarantine, I started a podcast to help talk about those differences and work through those microaggressions. And hopefully, one conversation at a time, we can hopefully change that one day.
Thank you, Kirtana. We'll next hear from Arshia.
Hi, everyone. I'm Arshia Sachdeva, and I just graduated from Shrewsbury High School, and I will be attending Northeastern University in Boston in the fall. And at my high school, I was an officer of the Black History Committee. And after seeing the instant outrage on social media after the tragic murder of George Floyd, we organized a march and vigil in the center of the town of Shrewsbury in honor of George Floyd and other victims of police brutality. By seeing everyone passionately marching and chanting together and hearing the heartfelt speeches, I truly believe that each person in that crowd, including me, was touched by the stories that they heard, and it inspired me to want to do even more for the movement. Since then, we have been pushing for accountability and anti-racist work in our school systems, with meetings with school faculty and administration, and we've also sent out many letters and petitions through different social media campaigns. Being a member of ISW since I was 6 years old, I attended the language school and was a student teacher, and I was also a member of IYG for 6 years. And I realized that there was a gap in communication in many South Asian households while discussing issues about race. And I wanted to help spread awareness within the South Asian community and help people realize that this was an important conversation that needs to be had.
Thank you so much, Arshia. Next, we'll hear from Danush.
Hi, everyone. My name is Danush Cheldarai. I recently graduated from the Mass Academy of Math and Science at WPI, and I'll be attending Yale College in the fall. And my drive to help and become an ally really began over a year ago. So I was the captain of my high school math team, and it became apparent to me that there was an issue in the math community where the number of girls participating in our math competitions was nowhere near the number of girls that were more than capable of participating. So in learning how to fix these issues, I began to learn about a lot of topics such as stereotype threat, implicit association bias, and numerous other ethical principles. And so when the murder of George Floyd really brought about a national awakening, I felt the need to utilize what I had already learned to help the movement push forward.
Thank you so much, Danush. Next, we'll hear from Kavya again. Kavya, feel free to just reintroduce yourself and share a little bit about what motivated you.
As Kavya mentioned earlier, I studied security and resilience studies in college. And a big part of this emphasized the way in which a community can be empowered and overcome any challenge. And I've always been very passionate about the ideas of system change and the idea that everyone can become a change maker. And I strongly do believe that one voice can make an impact. While I'm very active with my posts about this on social media, I realized that most of my followers already had similar woke perceptions as me. So I was trying to come up with different ways that I can make more of a meaningful impact in my community. And that's why I took the approach of the letter and that Black Lives Matter initiative. And specifically why I'm passionate about BLM. It's 2020 and systemic racism, anti-Black sentiments, and inequality, injustice, they're all so prevalent in every aspect of our society. I'm tired of seeing this continue, and I really do want to make an active role in putting an end to the whole racial injustice phenomenon.
Thank you, Kavya. We'll finally hear from Aditya.
Thank you, Shub. I also wanted to echo your guys' words in thanking ISW for letting us be here today. We really appreciate it. So I'm currently a second year at the Rochester Institute of Technology. I'm studying computer science. And as for the question, I've always been interested in current affairs. And over time, I've really just been able to identify the clear injustice towards Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And through my time in high school and college, I've witnessed and faced a racial bias. And as a result, 3 of my peers and I also made a podcast. And in one of our episodes, we talk about racial injustice as a whole. I'm currently in the process of educating myself and my peers so we can unite together and solve this problem.
Thank you, Aditya. That was actually the perfect kind of transition to our first question. So right as we talk about what's actually motivated us to get involved in the movement, we know that a really important first place to start is self-reflection and educating ourselves as South Asians. So we'd love to hear first from Kavya Raghunathan, how did you educate yourself on this movement? And what's a good place to start for those of us who are maybe new to this process and new to educating ourselves on race and oppression?
Thanks, Shub. That's a really important question. My first step was acknowledging my own implicit biases and racial privilege. And doing that, it was just reading and reading and reading. And I started by using like the one thing I knew best as a 20-something in 2020, which is social media, Twitter specifically. I found this community of South Asian diaspora who understood not only the discrimination that we face as brown people, but also recognize that we have so much privilege that shelters us from what our Black counterparts face. So we started to share articles, educational material, academic papers, podcasts, Netflix documentaries, published books. And we started holding each other accountable for engaging with this material and holding each other accountable for covert acts of racism that we were actually engaging in on a day-to-day basis. So I realized that the best way to start, especially because involving yourself in this movement can be overwhelming, is in 2 parts. And the first is starting to educate yourself with someone else who can hold you accountable. And the second is with just a quick Google search, why do Black Lives Matter? And you'll soon find that like one article leads to another, which leads to another and another. And what was once overwhelming soon becomes palpable and enlightening, especially when you have someone else who can hold you accountable, because this creates more discussion, more thinking, and an additional viewpoint to learn from. And it really drives home the point that this is truly a collective effort.
It so is. And this is such a great testament to that collective effort. I would love to hear from Kirtana as well. How did you begin to educate yourself as you join, corporate America?
Yeah, definitely. I think my journey honestly started during university at Bryant University. Going into my sophomore year, I became a resident assistant. And for those who don't know, I basically look over the residents at Bryant University. I cater to their needs and kind of check in to make sure they're okay. And while doing that job, I had to go through a series of bias incident training. So different bias incidents that may happen on campus. So how would you deal with a racist actor? How would you deal with a microaggression? And I think that's one of the biggest topics that people also kind of miss when they look at racism. I know Kavya mentioned it in her speech, like everyone can just say that they're not racist, but people don't realize that their actions speak louder than words. So it's those microaggressions like, oh, your hair looks fun, can I touch it? That's a big no-no. And there's a bunch of other things that people just haven't seen before or understood. So what I like to say is, which I think Kavya also mentioned, is that one conversation can really change a whole mindset. So to have that conversation back and forth between one another, you can start to influence and talk about new things that you would have never thought about before. And when you have that conversation, you can learn to understand bigger and better ideas and how to implement it. So the same thing with corporate America. One of the biggest things I've learned and talked to my friends who are Black and my other friends of color, straight hair is supposed to be professional versus curly hair. So how do you battle that within corporate America? How are you supposed to step aside and, you know, make things normal or break the stigma? So I started my podcast to discuss that and breaking those stereotypes, and hopefully by having those conversations, even the conversations I have within my family, my friends, they go and talk to other people. So again, it's a chain, and that's just how we want to start this movement.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Kirtana. We'll go on to the next question. We have about 15, 20 minutes left, and recognizing to feel free to send in your questions as they arise. So, you know, the first step oftentimes is self-reflection, educating ourselves. That's not good enough, right? We need to go into the next step of actually being cognizant of how our daily behaviors and actions actually contribute to racism, how they're complicit in systemic racism. So I'd love to hear from Kavya, Balaji, if you could, you know, how has your education actually shaped your daily actions and behaviors? Has it shifted anything for you? How would you like to reflect on that?
Mm-hmm. I think that the main way we can be cognizant of our behaviors is first, in fact, self-awareness. I think Dhanush mentioned earlier the implicit association test is first to figure out what are you even biased to, and then paying attention to your daily patterns of thought, your patterns of action. And once you've recognized these patterns of thought and action, then having discussions with others, especially from socially dissimilar groups. That can be very helpful. Sharing your biases with other people helps other people become more secure about exploring their own biases. Being open to learning and hearing other perspectives. Probably the worst thing that you can do is to close yourself off to hearing other perspectives. You can't get anywhere with that. And lastly, it's telling yourself that it's okay to have prejudiced thoughts. It's okay to have stereotypical thoughts. As humans, we naturally categorize as a way to efficiently organize our thoughts. You're not responsible for your first thought, but you are responsible for your second thought and your first action responding after that first thought.
Awesome. I love that. I think that's such an important sense of also recognition that we're human, we make mistakes, but we can totally, absolutely learn from our behavior and make adjustments as needed. Aditya, what do you have to share about maybe how your education has shaped your actions, behaviors as it contributes to systemic racism?
Yeah, thank you, Shub. I think, you know, I've personally just been more aware and understanding of offensive rhetoric, and I think that's a great place to start. And, you know, it's not even about myself, it's about my family or friends, and slowly we can really just disperse our ideas amongst ourselves. Social media has been extremely beneficial to get a small glimpse of all the problems that are at hand, and sharing relevant and educational pieces is crucial. And I think that as a society, we've done a really good job of doing that. I also think it's extremely important to be mindful of what others are saying, hear them out, and if they find something offensive, educate yourself and reflect on that. The whole point of this movement is for us to be adaptable to the current environment and realize that our society is changing for the better. Once we are able to process this education and realize what actions we need to take, we can individually create justice.
That's so important, Aditya. Thank you. And it sounds like what I kind of misspoke earlier. It sounds like what you're actually doing is contributing to anti-racism, right? By engaging these conversations, which I think is the goal for a lot of the movement and as well as our daily actions. So we've come to a space now. We're actually doing some self-reflection. We're educating ourselves, and now we're actually intervening in our own daily behaviors. So the next step often is to now look out in the world and see where there are areas of problematic behaviors, concerning behaviors, racism in our own communities, and how can we all actually take what we've learned, take what we've self-reflected on, and actually intervene in those spaces and ensure that our loved ones and our colleagues and our peers are not experiencing oppression in those spaces. So I'd love to ask Dhanush to start us off by thinking through what are some strategies that we can all actually respectfully address some of these issues in either professional settings, educational settings. What have you actually done to intervene in those ways?
Yeah, so I think Kirthan was talking about it a little bit before about the idea of microaggressions, and that's something I've had to deal with, especially in school with even students and teachers. And I'd say with like kids and high schoolers, microaggressions are even more prevalent than they are in other settings, because a lot of kids don't understand the difference between the intent of their actions and their words and the actual impact of those actions. And honestly, I don't think I even did until recently in high school. And because for a lot of them, they may not intend to say anything mean or negative. They might not, they might see it as a joke, and it's almost normalized in these scenarios and communities that it's just a joke, but it can really have a big impact. And especially when you actually see like people around you making those microaggressive statements. And let's say for a lot of people and a lot of kids, they can recognize that it's bad, it shouldn't, it's not an acceptable action, but actually acting upon that is the hard step. And the best thing to do is just act, say something. Because what happens if you don't is you continue to normalize those actions. And also, it can have a huge negative impact on your mental psyche and your mental state and all your mental health, because you're just going to keep having this battle in your head of, should I say something? Should I not say something? This is like my best friend saying something that's like problematic. I know it's problematic. But again, the best thing to do, even if it's a teacher, it can be a little bit daunting, is just talk to them about it. You know, even like try and like help them understand maybe some of the stuff that you went through, that Kavya and Aditya talked about in the previous question. And just help them understand that oftentimes like a small joke or comment can have really large and reaching consequences. And that's something I'm still working on myself, trying to get better every day at.
Thanks so much, Dhanush. I really appreciate that. I want to hear from Arshia as well. How have you navigated these spaces? How have you intervened in moments where you see concerning or harmful behavior actually being perpetuated around you?
Yeah, so to build on what Dhanush said, I also just graduated from high school and will be attending college in the fall. And to put things simply, as students, we notice things. From hate-filled microaggressions in classrooms to racial slurs being used in the hallways. It's something that we've all unfortunately become accustomed to. And one example is that in most 10th grade English classes, they read To Kill a Mockingbird out loud in class. And many students and teachers will blatantly say the N-word, which can be traumatic to Black students in the classroom. And a quick fix could just be a simple heads up from a teacher that we're not going to say the N-word. And while reading, instead, we'll say XYZ in place of that. And also, in light of recent events, there's been a lot of Instagram accounts emerging in nearby towns. And one that I want to talk about real quickly is @Voices at Shrewsbury, which allows students to anonymously send in stories of racism and discrimination that they faced in schools. And some of these incidents have been reported as early as elementary school. And I urge all of you to go read these stories because they're devastating and they highlight that there needs to be some change in our schools. And trust me, I know it can be hard and uncomfortable to speak up, and even most teachers are afraid to get involved because they fear getting political, but it is truly necessary for normal people like us to step up and say something. If you hear another student using a racial slur or witness a microaggression from a teacher, have a conversation with them. Like Dhanush was saying before, sometimes people don't realize that their actions are hurting others, and a simple conversation can go a long way. But if these actions are persistent, that's when we should speak up on a larger scale. And whether it's by contacting school administration or spreading awareness online, this is our time to unite and make a change.
Thank you so much, Arshia, for that really important comment around actually speaking up. A lot of what Gabi was saying earlier is about that very comment as well. We're going to start to take some, audience questions. We really appreciate you all sending in some thoughts. Our first question that we got from the audience is around the lines of, I'll just quote, "So as an Indian raised in India, I experienced more color discrimination from my own community than here in the US. So how do we change this in our community?" And the Indian community is kind of specified here. So I'd love to actually hear from Kirtana to start us off what would your thoughts be around how to actually intervene when we're speaking about our own colorism within the Indian community?
Yeah, no, I'd definitely love to answer. I think it definitely starts from oneself, like from your own personal self-esteem and what you truly think about the situation. I can speak about this personally. I have faced colorism when I do go back to India to visit my grandparents, not from my family, but from others publicly. If I went to a salon to get my hair done or I did a face mask, they would usually ask me if I wanted to do the face bleaching one to get my skin lighter. And that definitely did bring me down a lot when I was younger because I didn't even love myself. I didn't appreciate myself. I didn't think I was worth it. But the minute that I realized, you know what, my skin is beautiful and this is a culture we need to change, that's the minute that I was like, okay, let me start this conversation with others. I love who I am. I'm successful in what I do. So how can I show other people that my skin color doesn't determine what we truly are or what we're capable of? So it truly does start from, I think, from yourself. So the minute that you accept yourself from where you stand and who you are, you can start having those conversations, being like, you know what, my skin color doesn't mean anything of what I'm capable of, what I'm not. And the minute that you are supportive of the idea or are able to properly convey your true thoughts and feelings, you can begin to have those conversations with people in your community and start to change those minds. And honestly, this idea though of colors and dark skin versus light skin, it's not going to be an easy conversation. It's been rooted for years and years within our culture. So we do need to take it a step at a time, but having that conversation is always a great place to start.
Thank you so much, Kirtana. I really appreciate you sharing kind of your own experiences with that. You know, I can add on as well that I think for those of us who are witnessing this, maybe if we see comments that are being made about skin color, I think of it very similarly to how I would intervene in moments at a school setting where I see students making problematic and concerning statements about each other's appearances or, you know, own personalities. I would probably ask questions, right? That's a really great way to start kind of engaging in the material without putting anybody in the defensive. So what does that sound like? You know, it sounds like you hear somebody say, oh, beta, you're in the, you know, sun too much, you're spending too much time in the sun, you're getting dark. Maybe I'd ask, you know, why is that a problem? Or, you know, how does that matter? Or, and not, you know, with a tone necessarily, but just kind of bringing out a little bit more about what's going on underneath that statement. Obviously there's some kind of judgment there. And letting just that bring to the awareness so that we're talking about the same thing, which is that they're equating my skin color now with something that's a value, that's less value now. So ask questions for those of us who are in those moments where we see something happening, intervene and say, oh, that's not, you know, a nice comment to share. Like they look great. And definitely don't let that be part of the rhetoric at the next dinner party or the next kind of post-COVID experience that we all have together. And I think we all have to kind of work together to start actually intervening and making sure that the next generation of kids does not experience colorism the way that we all did and experience the same discrimination. So we'll go on, you know, to our kind of final set of reflections. And again, if we see more questions coming in, we'll certainly address those. We do want to give everybody a chance to reflect as we all have over this last hour. You know, we've done a lot of different things in terms of addressing anti-racism in our own systems and communities and our own selves and how we can actually engage in this work. So we thought it'd be helpful, you know, for those of us who are sitting in the audience right now wondering, okay, what can I do to get involved? What's the next step for me? What can I actually get engaged in? We thought we'd give kind of our first steps that we maybe took or some ideas that we all kind of came up with that might be a great place to start. So I'll kick us off and say that, you know, as we all kind of, the first question that we all answered was, how did I educate myself, right? And that's kind of the best place to start. Start internally, figure out what your biases are. I say attend all of these wonderfully rich webinars that are happening online that mostly are free. And if you need any resources, please do, again, reach out to all of us. Listen to podcasts. I'd say 1619 is certainly a really wonderful podcast to start off with, and it gives really a broad overview of systemic racism in the United States. But please just listen, learn, engage in that reading, and then don't forget that there's always that next step of actually doing something about what you've just learned about. But we'll project some resources at the end, so you'll all be able to kind of pick something that you can learn from. And so next up, we'll hear from Gavia about what you're doing.
Thanks, Shub. Yeah, it's really easy to treat this resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement as like a trend, but in reality, this is our new normal. And, we need to start integrating purposeful anti-racist action into our everyday lives. So I think the best way to directly engage with this movement is to take consistent collective action. And a great, easy place to start is by moving money to people and to Black-led organizations and businesses. And this is so easy, especially because there's such a rich Black history and culture embedded into our sister city in Worcester. And you can get, this is as easy as just getting takeout from a local Black restaurant or shopping at a local Black business. You can even go online and buy from Black artists or buy from Black clothing brands or makeup brands, or even doing something as easy as streaming Black music. So once you do it once, you can set a reminder to do it again, as frequently as you can, every day, every week, every month, until it becomes second nature. And that is really what becomes this sustainable change.
Thank you so much, Gavia. And next we'll hear from Arshia.
Yeah, so one way that I've personally been supporting the movement is by signing petitions. It's very simple. It takes about 30 seconds to sign one, and you're supporting the movement for free. If you ever have 5 minutes, you can just sit down and sign a bunch of petitions in a row. And there's a fantastic list to start on the Black Lives Matter card website. And additionally, if you have the money, it would be very helpful if you could donate. And once again, there's a great list of Black Lives Matter organizations and bail funds to donate to on the Black Lives Matter card.
Thank you so much, Arshia. Aditya, if you wanted to share as well.
Yeah, if you're someone that might not be able to go out and protest right now because of COVID, or you're not able to donate, I'm a big fan of just being aware of your local, state, and national elections, educating yourself on all the candidates and the values they stand for. I think that's a very important and immediate way of recognizing and getting change within your local community. And then also, as I mentioned earlier, just be adaptable and willing to change your daily behavior, because our society is changing and it's changing for the better.
Thank you so much, Aditya. Next, we'll hear from Kirtana. What are you up to?
Just like I mentioned earlier, I am working on a podcast right now, which does focus in on my journey as a first-generation American Indian and growing up and figuring out how to love myself and how to support myself in this type of environment, which also includes the different racial injustices that are clearly happening. I have an episode about the Black Lives Matter movement and what we can do to better ourselves. And what I say in those podcasts is simply have that uncomfortable conversation. There's no other way to go about it. I know specifically from resident assistant training, conversations are not easy. You don't want to confront anyone, but if you don't have the conversation, how can we move forward? So that's my advice. I would definitely say have that conversation, get ready, read the news every day, keep yourself updated, and do the best you can to learn and be better.
Thank you so much, Kirtana. Yeah, I really appreciate hearing your advice about what you can actually do moving forward. And that certainly does involve uncomfortable conversations, I think. We'll hear from Danush as well. What advice do you have for our audience, or what are some good first steps to consider?
Yeah, so first off, I just wanted to ditto everything everyone else said. But I just wanted to say that I think the most immediate and permanent change you can make is to the people and organizations around you. And for me, that's been school. And as someone who wants to be a future educator or an education admin, I really do believe in the importance of teaching kids at a young age about topics like race, identity, ethics, and even politics, and how important all these topics are. And really everyone has a role in this. If you're a student, advocate for more holistic curriculum with relevant and realistic subjects that are taught, such as uncensored, uncensored, even implicitly uncensored, history lessons, and literature lessons with writings from Black authors, or even ones about Black subjects. And well, the list of topics just goes on and on and on. And if you're a parent, you can educate your kids on important topics that your schools might not teach. And I can definitely understand that you may not feel that your child isn't old enough for certain topics, but if your school doesn't teach it and you don't teach it, ultimately that kid gets put at a huge disadvantage trying to make sense of those topics when they first encounter them. So just don't be afraid. Your kids are likely more mature than you give them credit for. And, to move forward society, it's uber important for the younger generations to learn about these topics and become professionals in really understanding them.
Thank you so much, Dhanush. I so appreciate that as a member of the educational system, how much we need education reform, but also really holistic curriculum. We'll wrap up, full circle with Kavya giving us a sense of, what advice would you have for the audience? What's a good place to start for all of us?
I'd like to reiterate what Aditya was saying earlier about going out and voting. There's actually the statistic that only 49% of eligible Asians are voting right now. And that's compared to the 64% of eligible white population voting. It's significantly lower. And considering the fact that Asian Americans are the fastest growing racial and ethnic group in the US electorate, it's really important that we go out and become aware of the issues and understand these issues so that we can vote in ways that do support Black and Indigenous people of color. And then, like Kavya was saying, it's really important that we do have sustainable change and that we do think about how we can become lifelong informed allies and work together in a continuous momentum of combating racism. And especially when we have conversations with people around us, I think the best way of going about it is to really ask questions. Don't go into it with an agenda per se. Try to ask questions, figuring out where someone is coming from, understanding the root of how they got there and how they came to their current perception, and go into it with a complete, I'm listening to what you're saying, I hear you, and expressing that you hear everything that they're saying. Make them feel heard. And then understanding that, sure, you want everyone to get to the same page you are very fast, but social justice doesn't work like that. You can't expect people to jump from accepting the fact that racism exists to defund the police overnight. It's a journey, it's a step-by-step ladder, and being okay with the fact that even if it takes time, it's a worthwhile investment.
Thank you so much, Kavya. That's a great place to wrap up our panel discussion. I'd like to invite all of the panelists, please feel free to turn your cameras on before we transition to our final slide to talk about just quick resources as well as staying in touch with us if the audience would like to. And I wanted to, again, express tons of gratitude to all of our panelists, as well as our mentors, Shamananti and Raj Uncle and Kavya Balaji. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts at the beginning of this hour. Really appreciate it. As you can tell, this conversation is so rich and needs to be had. And of course, we could talk about this for hours and hours. We do want to leave everybody with some quick resources, and these were compiled again by Kavya in her letter. So for folks who are really interested in reading the letter, we'll make sure to get it to you all if you do give us your contact information. It's a really great place to start for those of us who are part of this conversation, who want to join the conversation. So I'll go ahead and share that final, the final slide that'll give us a chance to look at some resources. And so feel free, again, if you have any questions, these are just some quick resources that Kavya had put together in her letter, including some books to read, some movies to watch, many of them on, streaming platforms, and as well as some really great just web resources to consider. And our final slide will be, invitations to fill out this interest survey if you're interested in working with us in the future, becoming part of this conversation, the South Asian community. We've listed our email address as well as the interest survey link. Again, please do not hesitate to reach out to any of us. We would love to continue this conversation, and we're so thankful for ISW to give us this space in a very wonderful, so far, India Day. So thank you so much, everybody. We really appreciate it. Thank you to all of our panelists, and I hope you have a great rest of your weekend.